Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Bold TV. We are lucky to have Nicole Goodkind, politics reporter from Newsweek, back here on Bold. First time hosting. Welcome, Nicole.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Bold TV is brought to you by Independent Women's Forum, a nonprofit dedicated to developing and advancing policies that aren't just well-intentioned, but actually enhance people's freedoms, choices, and opportunities. We've got a great show for you lined up. Make sure to leave your comments, questions below on Facebook and Twitter. We're going to dive right in because we've got a congressman here at the top of the show. We don't want to keep him hanging. He's been on Bold before, so we're glad to have him back. Congressman Adriano Espaillat, who represents New York's 13th District. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And we know that your schedule is tight, so let's get right back into it.
So, Congressman, I know that you're the first formerly undocumented immigrant in Congress, the first Dominican-American person in Congress. Immigration is obviously really important to you. Can you give us an update to what you're working on right now?
Well, you may know recently a court ruled to suspend the abolishment of the TPS, temporary protected status, that provides protections for immigrants coming from Sudan, from Haiti, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And so that was a great decision. We're waiting for another decision from the Massachusetts federal court with regards to people from Honduras. So right now we're just informing people that are beneficiaries of TPS that they're not going to be at risk of being deported, and that in fact next year many of them have to renew their TPS status. So that's what we're working on right now, in addition to the family reunification efforts that we've conducted from my office and other offices of other congressional members.
So, Congressman, I know that many of your colleagues have said that they want to abolish ICE. We had a congressman, one of your colleagues, Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi. He said he's not ready to call for the abolishment of ICE until you would tell him what you're going to replace it with. Are you pro-abolishing ICE? And if so, what would be the replacement?
Well, there are other agencies, federal agencies, that are already very specific and exclusively direct their efforts to one particular area. For example, you have ATF, you have a bunch of federal agencies that are very much laser focused in one area. And what we feel is that ICE has taken a dramatic U-turn and shifted away from its original purpose. Its original purpose was to fight drug dealers and gang leaders and criminals that cross the border. And in fact, a good percentage, over 60% of its budget, is now spent in ripping 8-month-old children from their mother's arms. So they're now.
I think the president would say that what he's doing at the border is preventing human trafficking, child trafficking, and he's doing exactly what you said, which is the purpose of ICE.
Well, that's not what I've seen. I've met with over a dozen mothers that have traveled all the way from the West Coast as far as 3,000 miles to reunite with their children that have been stripped away from them. In fact, many of the unaccompanied minors that are in households here in New York and across the United States are now being sent back to Texas, to Tornillo, Texas, to a tent camp. Yep. So this is humiliating for America before the rest of the world. And for ICE to be engaged in ripping children away from their families as opposed to combating crime at the border.
Congressman, sorry to interrupt you. Congressman, there was a story this week that said a lot of the children that had been separated from their families are now being put up for adoption. I'm wondering if you saw that, if you're working to fight that.
Well, we're looking to reunite them as much as possible. Some of the children were sent back to the country of origin because their mothers were sent back to their country of origin. So for us to reunite with them, we have to send them back to Honduras or El Salvador. There are others whose parents are still here, and we're doing everything we can to reunite them with their family members. I think that they deserve to have that opportunity, and to just aggressively put them in foster care, it's the wrong approach. We must reunite these families. That is being consistent with American values and family values, which is something that we all as Americans really respect.
Congressman, so President Trump certainly won. One of his signature issues was the issue of immigration, and he would specifically say that there is an important distinction to be made between legal versus illegal immigration. He is married to an immigrant who came here legally, and to say that what's happening at the border, also people who are overstaying their visas, this is a problem of illegal immigration, and it's a question of sovereignty. So doesn't the United States have the duty to really protect the sovereignty?
Well, many of the people that are being incarcerated or whose children are being stripped away from are folks that are seeking asylum in our nation. And our nation has a long tradition of harboring and welcoming people that seek asylum because of either violence in their country or a natural disaster in their country of origin. That's been the tradition of our nation. And then we have a process through which, in the courts, we determine whether or not they should stay in the United States of America. So we cannot circumvent that process. And that's why the courts, in many cases, have stepped in and say, wait a minute, we're an independent branch of government, and we feel that the administration has overstepped their privileges. They have really overstepped their jurisdiction. And that is what has happened with regards to the Muslim ban. That happened with the separation of children. And just recently, this week, it also happened with regards to TPS.
Congressman, I want to turn to another topic that you're working on, which is housing. And you've got a bill. For our viewers who don't know, talk about what is a pass-through lease and what are you looking to do with this?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you right.
I said, I want to switch topics to the topic of housing. So housing here, in affordable housing questions. And you're working on a bill. Tell our viewers, if they don't know, what is a pass-through lease and what are you looking to do with this?
Well, there are several leases that are problematic. One of them is leases for preferential rent. That means that a person is in an apartment, but they're not paying the market rate rent, and the landlord offers them a preferential rent lease that will only give them, in many cases, 1 year or 2 year stay in that apartment. And once the lease is up, if the landlord is able to get the market rate for that apartment, they're out and they have no protection whatsoever. And that's so they pass through and they have no protection whatsoever. Now, there are 12,000 of those apartments just in the northern Manhattan section of my district. And
how long would that transition period be? I'm asking because Ronald Reagan famously said that the closest thing to eternal life is a government program. So if the intention is to help people temporarily, what's the cap and how do you ensure that this is something that's not abused, that it is indeed a temporary help?
No, this is not about temporary. This is a program. Rent stabilization is triggered by a vacancy rate that allows people to find an apartment without aggressive speculation from the real estate industry. So if the vacancy rate in New York City is 2%, that means that you're not going to have many apartments available. And therefore, when you do find an apartment, the landlord can speculate up your rent. So that's what triggers rent stabilization, and that's the law of the state of New York. And it's also the law of other jurisdictions across the country. And it's a good thing. It provides certain protections so tenants are not protected. I don't think this is a handout. I don't think this is a government program that's sort of like an entitlement without any real.
Congressman, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're going to have to.
And it helps New York City continue to have working class people in many of its neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Congressman, we're going to have to wrap soon, but quickly, a future colleague of yours, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has said that housing is a human right, and I'm wondering if you agree with that stance.
100%.
Do you think that will poll well nationally, though? I mean, the generic ballot is very much tightening. I understand that you're in a very progressive district, but when you see what's happening nationally, aren't you concerned that message, the gap is definitely tightening here heading into Election Day?
I think that a message that everybody should have a roof over their head is one that will resonate across the country. Whether you are in Florida and you just got hit by a hurricane, or whether you are in New York City or in Chicago or Los Angeles and you need affordable housing.
So, Congressman, I want to ask you real quick about Eric Holder and his comments that he made this week that when they go low, we kick them. And my question to you is, do you agree with that statement? What do you think he was trying to channel? What can the Democratic Party do? Because when I hear that as a conservative, that concerns me. That I'd rather see the Democratic Party, if they were going to truly believe in diversity and inclusion, to not use that language.
Well, I represent Harlem, East Harlem, immigrant Northern Manhattan, and the Northwest Bronx. And in my neighborhood, if you get punched in the eye, you throw another punch.
So you agree with Eric Holder?
Yes, I pretty much agree with it.
Can I just clarify? Eric Holder did tweet, I think last night, that he did not literally mean he wanted to kick anyone. He just meant he wanted to verbally kick them.
But certainly, if you punch me in the eye, I will throw another punch.
But he was not advocating for violence, actual violence.
So I also want to ask you, since we still have you, about Kanye, because you have a lot of people in your district who follow him, his White House meeting. What are your thoughts? What are you hearing from constituents as well? I
will just put it in one word: bizarre.
Definitely historic. Yes. And I was a fan. I thought it was amazing.
But it was bizarre.
Okay, and what of the fact that African American support for Republicans and President Trump is rising?
Is it rising? I don't see it in Harlem. In fact, I see it totally the opposite. And in fact, people across this district continue to think that his behavior at the White House was bizarre.
Well, we'll see what happens at the polls.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Congressman. Take care. Oh, yes. I was going to ask him, well, next time when he comes back, next week is Silicon Harlem, which is where I first met him, a tech community in Harlem. And they do, I met him at a congressional debate that they had. And there were 7 candidates, and he was the one who ended up rising and winning to take the seat that had been formerly held by Charlie Rangel.
That's awesome. Silicon Harlem.
That's nice So their annual conference is coming up next week. The founder, Clayton Banks, is a good friend of Bold. So
great.
Just a quick update. We want to let you all know about what's happening. The death toll, 5 people reportedly killed in Virginia as remnants of the storm Michael is blowing through. The death toll has now been raised to 11. If you want to help, you can text the Red Cross to 90999, and you can give $10 to the Red Cross Disaster Relief.
So easy, just text it.
Yeah. So we want to bring in our next guest via Skype. It's Brian Boucher, who is joining us via Skype. Brian is the CEO of the Millennial Solution. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Carrie. Hey, Nicole. How you doing?
Hey, Brian. Good morning.
And then
good to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you. And then also here on set, back here on the show, friend of Bold, John Haltewanger. He's politics reporter from Business Insider and former colleague of Nicole's.
At Newsweek, yep. We know him as Halty.
Yes.
But I'll try to call you John.
Sure, let's keep it that.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, you recently wrote an article about a poll. It revealed a large percentage of millennials are embracing socialism and democratic socialism. So tell us a little bit about that.
So, yeah, the poll showed that around 31% or so of millennials identify as either socialist or democratic socialist. It also showed that among millennials who identify as Democrats, nearly half of all of them either identify as socialist or democratic socialist. So it kind of shows that ideas from politicians like Senator Bernie Sanders or candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are really resonating with millennials right now.
And before we get into this, I think that it's important that we show what the distinction between full-on socialism is and democratic socialism, which is probably what people are supporting more.
Sure. I think when Americans hear socialism, especially Americans who grew up through the Cold War, Democrats and Republicans alike, it's kind of still a dirty word. They associate it with the Soviet Union. And authoritarianism, and other people today associate it with what's going on in Venezuela. But I think a lot of millennials associate socialism with the Nordic model, with countries that blend capitalism with welfare, and they are attracted to ideas like universal health care and subsidized education, the government projects dedicated to addressing climate change and various policies.
People
such as that.
Under democratic socialism, people want to work, right? But they just want to be on an equal playing field to begin with.
Sure, it's not about, democratic socialism and socialism are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same things from an academic standpoint. They are in terms of, political discourse today. People that say I'm a socialist probably mean they're a democratic socialist. They're not really meaning it in the traditional academic sense. And what they're really saying is, we believe the government should do as much as possible to assess people's basic needs. And we believe that workers should have as much control of the economy as possible. So that's why we've recently seen Bernie Sanders, for example, who identifies as a democratic socialist, pushing for Amazon to pay their workers a lot more.
Successfully.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Brian, I know you have a very different perspective about this, and the conversation was brought up about whether people under democratic socialism that they want to work, that it's a voluntary decision to move toward that system. I guess my question is then, if that's the case, then why do we see Democrats trying to roll back work requirements in order to get public assistance? And also, what are you seeing among millennials? Because it's almost like completely different lenses. I mean, statistically, what was presented is accurate in the sense that many millennials are heeding this. They find appeal in it. But what are you seeing?
What I think is interesting about the millennials that say they're for democratic socialism, some variant of socialism, is that I think a lot of those polled don't actually understand what it means. And I think what's interesting is that when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to subsidized education, all of it sounds nice, but it becomes quite unaffordable. And then, of course, you've got other countries that are testing out universal basic income, and the projects are running out of money really quickly. The ideas sound nice. They sound great. They sound like it levels the playing field. But in reality, it takes a government and gives it more power over the lives of individual citizens. What I think is fascinating when you pair that kind of polling about democratic socialism up against this, 67% of millennials desire to start their own business one day. They want to get their hands dirty in entrepreneurship. Now, not all of them will actually do that, but there's a desire there. And I don't believe that in the long term that a democratically socialist mechanism is actually going to support the desires and dreams of those who want to start their own business. It's going to get really burdensome when it comes to regulations and the cost of healthcare and taxes. I just don't see it the same way, and I don't see that kind of model, whether millennials like it or not, 31%, whatever the number was, I don't see that kind of model actually supports what millennials dream to do.
So, Brian,
with
let me
life.
jump in there and ask you a question, because I agree with you that millennials are a very entrepreneurial sect or bunch. They're doing things like driving Ubers or renting out their Airbnb to make money and kind of start their own businesses. But in those models, they don't have healthcare, right? They don't have an employer to give them those things. So how do they survive in that case without this kind of stuff?
They do what I do. I own a business too, and I buy my own health care. And when my wife and I, Gabrielle and I, got married 3 years ago, under the Obamacare scheme, a catastrophic plan, I call it the cancer and car wrecks plan. It covers the absolute catastrophes, nothing else. It was a $12,000 annual deductible and nearly $500 a month, meaning I got no tangible benefit year to year on going in for a cold or anything like that. So the kind of health care that was offered under this kind of universal health care light under the Obama administration really didn't do anything for us as a couple except take a lot of money out the door. And then, of course, if you couldn't buy health care, you had to shell out $800 a year on your taxes because you didn't have health care as a tax penalty, whatever you want to call it. So I can say that as a business owner, I get it. I have an LLC that's in my name, but I have to either choose to buy health care or not buy health care. And I choose to do it. And I get it. I get that perspective, but it is not impossible to acquire health care. I think it's going to get better if some of the things that are left over from Obamacare go away.
Sure. I mean, it's easy to say it's not impossible to acquire health care. That's true. But Obamacare did help a lot of uninsured millennials gain insurance. And also, if you look at the World Happiness Index every single year, the happiest countries in the world are the Nordic countries, where people have their basic needs met. And when people are asked why they're so happy, it's because that they feel that there's a strong safety net in place and that they feel that their society takes care of them. So I think, we have millennials who are saddled with astronomical levels of student loan debt. Yeah, it's a nice idea to think that we can all start a business, but most people are trying to just, they're paycheck to paycheck. They're just trying to get their student loans paid off. They don't, sure, they want to start a business, but that's a pipe dream for most millennials. And it's a nice idea, but it's just not realistic. And you're saying that the socialist model, There are problems with it. Sure, there are concerns to be had there, but the current model for millennials, there's a lot of reasons why they're not attracted to it. The Great Recession hit millennials harder than any other generation. Capitalism hasn't really been that kind to this generation, so you can understand why they're so attracted to another model.
But John, I want to ask you about Europe because you mentioned it, that a lot of countries right now are actually experiencing a backlash against socialism, that a lot of people are seeing. And in fact, we had a guest here from Sweden, and I mentioned the Economic Freedom Index from Heritage Foundation. And Sweden actually ranks higher than the United States in economic freedom, which a lot of people didn't know. But just overall in Europe, you're seeing that a lot of people, and what our guest from Sweden mentioned was that a lot of immigration that's coming into Europe, that a lot of immigrants don't necessarily have the same work ethic or desire or cultural values that are embedded in this scheme of democratic socialism, to the point where the system is collapsing on itself. And that's why you're seeing so much backlash in Europe.
Yeah, I think that this is really more tied to nationalism than a opposition to socialism. I think that most Swedes appreciate the welfare system. I think that yes, there is a sharp turn to the right across Europe that we're seeing, that we've also seen here in terms of the rise of xenophobia, anti-immigrant sentiments.
But 58% of American or immigrants in America are on some form of welfare. So the largest group of welfare recipients
are white people in America. That's something we don't often talk about.
Well, you're talking about numerically versus proportionally.
Sure.
But proportionally, 58% of immigrants are on some form of welfare. And so to say that, as, again, sovereignty, how is that xenophobic to say that American families deserve to care for their children or to have children if they can't afford them because they're paying for people from another country?
Well, immigrants also, the U.S. economy benefits a great deal from immigration, even undocumented immigration. Undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes every single year. That's not something we often hear from the right when we talk about undocumented immigration. They don't want to admit that undocumented immigrants pay taxes. And if they were given a pathway to citizenship, they would pay more taxes. And they don't actually benefit from a lot of the programs that they put money into. So I think that that's kind of a skewed argument to say that Americans are just paying for the lives of these immigrants. They're working hard. They want to be here. They, in many cases, fled terrible situations, and they came here in search of a better life.
Well, John, we're going to wrap right there. We'll see what election day, whether what you're saying is right or what Brian is saying is resonating with voters. We'll see. So thank you both for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And no matter what you believe, you have to get out and vote in order to make it happen. So according to vote.org, voter registration ends today in New York, North Carolina, and Oklahoma. So fill out those registration forms if you haven't yet.
In those 3 states. And if you're in other states, check out elsewhere. And we are Skyping in someone right now. Let's bring in a few questions, comments. Nancy Augustine says, LOL, full-on socialism. She's saying that there's no distinction. And John Sheridan says, red wave, Soviet style.
I think these might be jokes.
Interesting, yeah. Our bold viewership is feeling funny today.
Yeah.
So, and Scott Harris says, how many people do you think we can cram into this country? This is about more than immigration. We are about to break at the seams economically. We just can't take it anymore. Build the wall and vote red.
I don't know if there's any evidence to support that, but that's his view, and we respect it.
A lot of people agree with him. So, yeah, it's definitely, again, just get out and vote. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, vote.
Millennials vote.
Yes. And we're going to bring our next guest via Skype. My friend, who I haven't seen him in a while. He was a classmate of mine at Harvard, my friend Nizar Farzak, who is joining us on Skype. Nizar is a former advisor to the Palestinian leadership, and he works on negotiating conflicts. Hi, Nizar.
Hi, how are you? Been a while.
Great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you too.
We've also have here on set Alon Giorno. He's with us. He's the director of policy research at the Ayn Rand Institute and the author of What Justice Demands: America and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. Welcome, Alon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Alon. So your book kind of breaks away from what most Americans think we should do to to come to some sort of solution, which is a two-state solution. So can you tell us why you don't think that's the right way to go?
Sure, and I think it comes from having a very different view of what's at stake in the conflict and what's kept it going. So the reason people think the two-state solution is a solution is that the conflict has been going on and would continue so long as there's no Palestinian state. And I think that's a misconception. I think what's really driving the conflict is ideas. It's an ideas-driven conflict. It's not about land primarily. It's about what people would do with the land if they managed to create a country. And I think when you break it down, it's really a conflict, not between two tribes, but between two groups of people, two ideas, really. One is about creating a free society, and one is about creating an authoritarian, dictatorial, even theocratic society. I think it's a clash between freedom and tyranny. And when you see it that way, the solution isn't to create another tyranny, which is what the Palestinian Authority, the proto-state, has become, and what we've seen in Gaza is a theocratic model. And those are not anomalies. Those are really reflective of what the Palestinian movement's aspirations have been for decades. I mean, they've had mini states in Lebanon and in Jordan, and similar things have been seen about them. So I don't think the solution is to create another state that is cut from the same cloth as the rest of the Middle East, which is authoritarian and dictatorial. If anything, I would encourage people to stand up for freedom, which is the principle I argue for in my book. And all people in the Middle East who are for freedom, including people in Israel, among the Palestinians, and throughout the Middle East. So if we want progress in human freedom throughout that part of the world and to lift it up, we need more freedom, and that includes for the Palestinians.
So, Nizar, your thoughts?
So I think that's flawed. Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in general want freedom. Their relationship to Israel has to do with the conflict, the fact that as far as Palestinians and Arabs have been concerned, Israel has always been war, has been oppression. So there is a school of thought in the Arab world that believes that Israel only responds to violence and you only get results from Israel through violence, and that negotiations gets you nowhere. And unfortunately, Israel has over and over proved them right, whether it is prisoners exchange or withdrawal from Lebanon. It does seem like Israel only responds when the pressure is military pressure, and in negotiations you don't get very far. Having said that, I'm very disturbed by the framing non-Israelis as people who desire authoritarianism, painting a whole culture or whole people as authoritarian is very disingenuous at least, racist at best. The Arab Spring is a case in point of Arabs wanting freedom. And in fact, the case they make is that they're sick and tired of Arab regimes using Israel as an excuse for their authoritarianism. I'm actually going next.
Nizar, if you're, you mentioned the Arab Spring, but we saw the unraveling of my heart was with these protesters in the Arab Spring, but it seemed that the fruition didn't match what they were calling for. So, I mean, what's missing? I mean, what's the disconnect between what we're seeing in the West, which is the collapse of people who are pushing for freedom? I mean, what are we missing there?
So there are obviously very big interests that stand to lose in a more representative government in Arab countries. And these are the forces that are clamping down on freedoms. You can see it, of course, in Syria, in Egypt. Tunis is the one case where they happen not to have a strong army, and they happen to be a more homogeneous society, and that's why it's working, but it's still not there for sure. So it's a question of generations and just calibrating the interest, because there are a lot of powers that are against more freedoms for sure. But the populace, as a populace, is seeking more individual freedoms. And part of that is that there is a segment of society, 20-30% of Palestinian and Arab society, that is religious, believes that religion should have a primary role in society, the same way that evangelicals, for example, here do. And there needs to be, and there is a negotiation or a discourse between the Islamists and the seculars over what kind of society can we coexist in. In some places like Tunisia, they're managing to continue to have that discourse. In other places, it's collapsing and it's actual civil war.
So Alon, help me out. Is it 25 or 30 years since Oslo?
25.
25, and it's a big anniversary. So Oslo was, of course, when, we kind of shook hands. President Clinton watched over it, and America helped come to some sort of agreement between the Palestinian people and Israelis. Obviously didn't really work out. It was flawed, but it did do some things, right? It made it so that Israelis actually recognized the Palestinian people and vice versa, and it kind of pushed the dialogue along. So should the U.S. continue to have a role in this? Should we be pushing?
I don't know of credible arguments for continuing a policy that has been a massive failure for 25 years. And I would say that one of the failures, one of the big parts of this is conflating the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian people. Those are distinct things. And I think a lot of the unrecognized victims of the Palestinian movement, the ideological movement, are the people that it claims to speak for and whose rights it claims to be righting. They're the ones who live under the Palestinian Authority, the proto-state, that has become a dictatorial regime. So I don't think continuing that is the right solution. And I think part of what we need to do is to step back and say, look, 25 years of experience, what have we learned from this? And I think part of what we need to learn is you need to evaluate using a principle. And that means applying the principle of justice. And this is exactly what we didn't do when Clinton ushered Arafat and Rabin to handshake on the White House lawn. What they did is they disregarded the goals of the Palestinian movement, and Arafat was the poster child for that. He was a pioneer of international terrorism. Before Al-Qaeda went global, the PLO blazed the trail. And that has to be taken seriously. I mean, the goals of that movement were to subjugate people. And that's what they did in practice.
So if you were advising, Jared Kushner or President Donald Trump, because this is something that they're looking at very closely, what would you say their involvement in this situation should be? What should they do?
I think step one is to step away from the two-state solution and identify explicitly what went wrong with it, which is to see that, look, handing a movement that is a dictatorship without territory means they become a dictatorship. So the Palestinians have not put forward, unfortunately, and this is one of the tragedies, they've not put forward leaders who truly care about their own people and want to see them thrive.
I want to give Nizar a chance to respond.
Sure. So again, it's blatantly flawed to say that there is a movement that wants and its goal is to subjugate people. You could say the same about the Republican or Democratic Party's goal being subjugating Americans. That's completely ludicrous. Again, I don't want to say racist. But the challenge with the peace process was the peace process came at a time when both the Israeli and Palestinian and Arab leaderships came to a realization that they have failed to extinguish the other, right? So it wasn't like suddenly Palestinians and Israelis loved each other. They just came to a practical realization that they are incapable of deleting the other. So they said, okay, probably let's try to find a way to coexist. A two-state solution would make sense. Now, there were a lot of flaws in the agreement itself, and then further compounded by the application of that flawed agreement. So granted, we are where we are. The challenge now is what is something that is going to work for both peoples, right? So while we can disagree about history, we can disagree about narratives, ultimately we need to see what solution works for a good enough majority in both populations that it would actually sustain itself. So for Palestinians want complete and absolute sovereignty. They're not interested in sovereignty minus. Unfortunately, Israelis, all the proposals that have been proposed for the final status negotiations were sovereignty minus, right? And that was not good enough for Palestinians. So we need to think of a solution that works for both. Now, if we are not going to go for the two-state solution, the one thing that remains is the one-state reality we have, where there's a majority of Arabs and a minority of Jewish population. If you are to be a one state with one person, one vote, it would obviously stop being a Jewish state. So the two-state solution is an Israeli interest before anything, or a Zionist interest.
Yeah, Nizar, we got to wrap it out very quickly from both of you. I just want to get shifting topics very quickly to what happened with the Saudi tensions with the Turkish journalist who reportedly went to the Saudi embassy and was killed there. We're still waiting on the details, but what should be the U.S. response in this situation?
I do think it's very unfortunate that they did that. The Saudi regime is showing even more authoritarianism and ruthlessness. I do think it's very critical that the U.S. put it foot down and make sure that the Saudis understand that this kind of behavior is absolutely not acceptable. Otherwise, they think they have a blank check.
Well, I would say this is one more reminder of the nature of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, which is completely sordid and immoral. And part of what illustrates this is that the journalist who was taken and apparently killed, his criticisms don't even rise to the level of challenging the legitimacy of the monarchy. There are people languishing in Saudi jails who want free speech and have been lashed for it, and that is the nature of this regime. It's a theocratic monarchy that we should have nothing to do with. We need to break with them and call them out as the horrific regime that they are. That's a step in the direction of clarifying the moral standing of our policy.
All right. Well, thanks to you both. We'll have to have you back. Very lively discussion. Thank you so much, Nizar and Alan.
Thank you.
We've got some breaking news here. A Turkish court has freed the American pastor at the center of a diplomatic dispute. They're allowing him to leave Turkey despite a terror conviction. AP News reports that he had been charged, well, we already know this, with aiding terrorists and espionage. So the pastor has been freed. That's something that the president was very vocal about.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a big topic.
Yes.
And there's so many.
We're not going to solve it in a 10-minute segment,
yes.
but it's good to hear from differing views and see what's going on.
And they both want freedom, and that's the start.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to run through a couple of headlines just here. I want to talk about your Newsweek article on climate change. So let's put that headline up and let our viewers know a little bit about this.
Right. So I'm sure everyone saw this this UN report that was out today that said we basically have about 12 years to get together globally and prevent all of the methane gas that's going into the atmosphere, or else things will just be irreversibly destroyed. But the good news is that Republicans and Democrats actually have a lot more in common on the idea of climate, or the issue of climate change, than we think. The majority of Republicans believe that climate change is real. They believe that it's man-made. They want to do something to stop it. They're feeling it. And Democrats do too. Now, the only question is, can we get past the political grandstanding, the cries of, it's the end of the world, we need to do something, and then someone throwing a snowball in Congress and saying that climate change isn't real. We need to be able to get past that to actually give the people what they want, which are real solutions.
So, it hasn't really been a hot topic. Well,
it's not
no pun intended.
Yeah.
This election cycle. I mean, there's been I feel like the oxygen has been. We'll see in 2020. Do you think it'll be a big issue for Democrats in the primary?
Right. So the problem is we have a president right now who has denied that climate change is real multiple times. In the 2016 election, I think during 3 debates, they asked about climate change once, and the candidates spent all of 5 minutes on it. That was about 2% of the debates. It's not a particularly sexy topic, but it's an important one, right? We already see. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington has said he's not ruling out running, and if he does run as a Democrat, it would be completely on a climate change platform. So I think we are going to see more of this in the 2020 election.
Well, if he gets Al Gore behind him, that's it. That's a big machine.
Well, that's the problem, right? Because Al Gore really... the Republicans kind of stayed away from global warming or climate change for a while, I think, because it was so polarizing with Al Gore. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no. So another topic on the issue of the midterm. So I was on Al Sharpton's show on MSNBC.
Right.
I have a quick click about it. I want to get your take on what we were debating.
Let's see it.
Isn't that also going to motivate people to say, we've got to change and have a blue wave, because we are in a one-party country this morning?
Well, Reverend, I think what the check should be is that the Democratic Party needs to check itself about how far left it has been taken over by socialists. It's taken over by far hard left people who do not respect the rule of law. They would rather have the rule of the mob. And so we've seen with this Kavanaugh situation is that the rule of the mob, you can't bully someone to vote your way. You have to persuade them. You can't scream at them and expect them to feel respected. That's what we're seeing, Reverend. And so if you actually care about the rule of law and checks and balances, why didn't the left try to persuade people? That's what democracy is about.
Karen,
you can't riot.
few comments.
Because the word mob was a very debated word this week.
But before that, I think it's a little much to say that the Democratic Party has been taken over by far left socialists. And I think you have to agree with me on that one, because most of Democratic leadership is, they're neoliberals who probably want nothing to do with socialism. When you think about, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, that's who's leading the Democratic Party right now, right?
But I was thinking more of like the very vocal, like your Cory Bookers, your Kamala Harris. Like I was there.
Right, I wouldn't call
Bernie
those people
Sanders.
Far left socialists.
Bernie Sanders is a
Bernie
proud
Sanders isn't a
socialist.
Democrat. He's an independent. He caucuses with the Democrats. But second of all, this is what I'm curious about. What is a protest and what is a mob? Because when I think of mob rule or mobs, I think of the neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville who are holding torches and weapons, shouting, Jews will not replace us. That's what I think of as a mob. I don't think of as women who are upset, who are just going out there and protesting nonviolently. I think the term mob is something that's been used by President Trump repeatedly, and it kind of feeds into this George Soros conspiracy, which also goes back to dog whistle anti-Semitism. And I think it's an odd choice.
Well, President Trump is the strongest pro-Israel candidate or president we've literally ever had. So when people say there's anti-Semitic dog whistles, to me that doesn't make sense.
But let's go back to the mob, because
so there's that point. And then the mob question, to me, a mob is someone who is not, it's an irrational group of people. It's people who are not driven by facts. And that was the Kavanaugh thing. So the Kavanaugh thing, people were so upset because due process was being thrown out the window. Evidence didn't matter. Facts didn't matter. Data didn't matter. That's what a mob is.
I think they saw the facts, they watched the testimony, and they came to their own conclusion. I'm not saying whether their conclusions are right or wrong. That's for them to decide. They're non-violently protesting. That's not a mob. That's a protest. This isn't conspiracy. It's democracy.
But if the mob doesn't believe in facts, isn't that the definition of a mob? An irrational crowd of people who would destroy a man's life.
Why are they being irrational?
Because they don't have facts on their side. But they don't have facts.
A lot of people don't have facts on their side. When the Tea Party was, protesting with effigies of President Obama, burning him, hanging him. That was a mob. That was a violent mob.
I saw that for W when I was in college.
Right, and that was a violent mob, right? There's a difference between a protest, because people don't believe in something, and a mob. We have the right to protest in America. That's one of our biggest rights, right? That's what makes us a functioning democracy. And to go and then say these people are having their paychecks signed by George Soros, which we both know that's not true, right?
Yeah, I mean, Soros writes a lot of checks.
You think that George Soros is paying all of these protesters? He's signing the checks. That would take years.
He's definitely a big Democratic and liberal donor, but
he's not paying protesters. No, he didn't sign any checks for protesters.
I'm sure it's.
You think that these protesters are paid by George Soros?
The vast majority of people who I know who are women who are protesting, a lot of them just do it on the side. I give you that, but it is. When I hear the Soros thing, I don't think of, again, he's a very pro-Israel president. This isn't about being anti-Semitic, and that's not fair to say that. When I hear that, I think of establishment. And that's what he's all about, is being against the establishment and big money.
That might be what you think of, but we've seen flyers on college campuses. We've seen the desecration of synagogues because of this. Because whether or not President Trump means it that way, and whether or not you take it that way, there are people out there who do take it that way. This is dog whistle anti-Semitism, and that's what they're hearing.
I want to point out that Nazi is short for National Socialist. So any Nazis, they are not conservative, and talk to Winston Churchill. He would say, shut the F up. If you think that Nazis are conservatives, they're socialists, they're National Socialists. So that's the fact check.
I don't know why we're talking about that type of
because
Nazi
you mentioned
right
Nazis
now. And
in
also,
Charlottesville. Nazi is National Socialist, which is the expansive government, which is the destruction of freedom.
Not making any point about my personal politics here, but I am saying that the Democratic Socialists are not the same things as 1930s Nazis in Germany, and I think we can both agree on that.
Yes, but you're associating the Charlottesville Nazis with Trump supporters, and I'm saying that
I'm not associating. I never made that association. To be clear.
Okay.
Even though they more likely than not are, right? I'm saying that that's what I think of when I think of a mob. I think of neo-Nazis marching violently. I think of the scene in Beauty and the Beast, right? When they go to the castle and they have like weapons and torches, and they're violent and motivated by, hate. I don't think of women getting together in solidarity, non-violently protesting, and that's it.
Well, we'll see what Election Day brings, because I think that the Kavanaugh situation was a motivator for a lot of people who felt like the mob, which is people who don't believe in due process, that's a mob.
We'll disagree on the definition of mob, but I think that either way, it was a great branding job by the Republican Party, and I'm sure that that's something we can agree on.
Yeah, well, the polls are tightening. We'll see what happens. But
yes, I do believe the Kavanaugh effect is real. Yeah, the Kavanaugh effect is very real on both sides.
Yeah, let's bring in our next guest, Julie Gunlock. Our friend Julie. She's the director of the Center for Progress and Innovation at Independent Women's Forum. Hey, Julie.
Hey there.
Hi, Julie. So this week, Nikki Haley announced she would be resigning at the end of the year. Big news. What was your reaction?
I was shocked and kind of sad. I'm a big fan of Nikki Haley. Everybody at IWF is a huge fan of Nikki Haley. I think she's been a great member of the administration. She's tough. She's fierce. She's a huge human rights advocate. She's done great things at the UN, including withdrawing the U.S. from the Human Rights Council, which is a joke. She's taken strong pro-Israel positions. And she's also, I think, on foreign policy, been a little bit more of a moderator to some of Trump's rhetoric. So it's really too bad to see her go. But the good news is in November, IWF is going to be honoring her. I'm going to try really hard not to be a total psychotic stalker fangirl at the dinner. But yeah, so that was our feeling. Sad to see her go, but really excited to see where she continues her career.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot of speculation. She said she's not running for 2020, but she will campaign for President Trump, and they'll continue their relationship. But there has been talk that, she might replace Jeff Sessions, or she might, be appointed to something. So I'm wondering, I'm sorry, not Jeff Sessions, Lindsey Graham, who might replace Jeff Sessions.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear where you think she'll be going.
Yeah, I love this speculation. Mm-hmm. The whole Lindsey Graham takes Sessions' spot and she takes Lindsey Graham's spot. I love listening to all of this and saying, what will happen? I doubt that's actually going to happen. And we know that people years before the election cycle gets started say, no, absolutely not. And then they change their mind. So people are allowed to change their mind. I think a lot of women like Nikki Haley. I think I think everybody likes Nikki Haley. Quinnipiac poll came out recently, 55% of people on both sides of the aisle approve of her. I think she's immensely popular. She's a very well-spoken woman. She's a great representative of conservatism. So I who knows? I would be happy if she ran, but I'm also happy to see her support Trump if she decides to stay out.
So why do you think she decided to leave now? Because I loved everything she was doing, and the Israel moving the embassy, just
right.
Being very pro-freedom in the Middle East. Why did she leave now? I thought it was just starting to get good.
I tend to not overthink these things. I will just say, as a mother of 3 boys, I spent 3 hours on homework last night. I'm still tired from spending hours. She's got kids. She's got a family. I have like 1/1000th stressful of a job as she has. So I don't know why she left, but I can only imagine, as a woman who's trying to work and take care of kids and run a household and take care of family, maybe it's just a matter of her wanting a little bit of a break for a while.
Yeah, well, she certainly left at the top of her game in popularity, and if she wants to go back into some sort of position, she's positioned herself to be able to do that. But moving on, who do you think will replace her?
I'm really uncertain on that at this point. There's a lot of great people who could. I don't know why Kellyanne Conway couldn't replace her. Obviously, Ivanka Trump was mentioned and quickly dismissed. But there are a lot of great people. I would love to see Condi Rice come back.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. She's so classy.
Love that too. But again, a part of me thinks, gosh, why some of these women probably have pretty great lives. I don't know that they want to go into dealing with the frustration of the UN. I'm not sure there is a more frustrating world agency out there. So who knows? Lots of good opportunities for not only women, but some men in the administration as well.
Yeah, some people said Rick Grinnell, who's the current ambassador to Germany, might be someone.
Yes, absolutely. He'd be great. He's been a wonderful appointee in Germany, and so he too. Also, I think Trump has a really great record of appointing not only women, but Richard Grinnell is part of the LGBT community. So I think his elevation to that spot would be an exciting development.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I just don't know what Nikki Haley's going to do. I mean, we'll see if this situation. I mean, certainly Lindsey Graham won over the affections of the president in his speech. It was interesting how forceful he was, given how much of a critic he had been of Trump, and so it almost seemed like that was where the bromance was solidified.
I think that was an audition, if I've ever seen one.
I will tell you, we've seen that. Look, Nikki Haley during the primary obviously was a never Trumper. That's my dog ringing the bell, trying to get outside. I'm having a BBC moment with my dog.
Adorable. Put him on camera. Let's see him.
Do you want to see?
Oh my gosh. Oh, puppy. Oh, that's so adorable.
That's so cute.
But I will tell you, Karen, the last thing I will say is you both should come to the dinner, the IWF dinner on November 14th. Nikki Haley, she's our woman of valor. She deserves it. We'd love to see you guys there.
And I do have to say, my mom, who is a Democrat, texted me and said, I really liked Nikki Haley. I'm sad that she's going too. So there is some, agreement on both sides that people like her.
2024.
You should bring your mom to the dinner.
Okay, I'll ask her. I do want to point out that in South Carolina, the governor does get to appoint the replacement for Lindsey Graham should he take some sort of role. So there wouldn't be a special election, which is something to think about.
Wow.
And she would fill that role till, I believe, 2020. So
that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, just speculation.
Well, we'll see. Make sure, if I can't make it to the dinner, I want to see your selfie either way, Julie.
Yeah, and more dog pictures.
Yes.
More dog pictures.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What's the dog's name?
The dog is named Ivy. She's a 9-month-old golden retriever. She's beautiful.
Very cute.
Cute. All right. Well, thank you, Ivy, and thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So that was adorable, that puppy dog. So it's definitely a lighter topic, which leads me into something while we're waiting for our last segment on Skype, which is a much heavier topic. But just while the topic's a little bit lighter, I had a little announcement this week that came out, and if we can put the headline up, what happened with Bumble.
Look at that!
So this is an ad campaign in the New York subway, and it's from
You look amazing,
Bumble.
by the way.
Oh, well, it was all their hair and makeup.
And strong and feminine and powerful.
Well, what I love, and in fact, we're going to have someone later on our Bold Life show from Bumble to talk about the campaign.
Oh, great.
But the founder of Bumble is a woman. I believe she's 29 years old now. And
how old I am.
see, you could be a billionaire. Well, her company is $1 billion company. I think she's got a quarter of it. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's...
No, I'm a journalist. I'll never be a billionaire.
Never say never. Come on. Oprah Winfrey?
Yeah, okay. I'll be...
Yes, the next Oprah right here.
God, I wish. No, but that's really amazing. I love Bumble. I'm in a relationship, I don't use it, but I do know that a woman has to approach the man first, which is an interesting way to do it in the Me Too era.
Yeah, well, then that's part of why Whitney, the founder of Bumble, did it, was because reportedly she had been at Tinder before, and Tinder didn't have the greatest reputation with women, and so she wanted to give women the control. So but they also have Bold Business, and Bold BFF for friends. So you and your significant other could also
make some
use
business partners.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, congratulations.
In fact, we actually hired someone at Bold on the social media team from Bold, from Bumble Business.
Really?
Too many bees, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it worked out.
Well, congratulations. My favorite cookbook author, Allison Roman, is also featured, so you're in good company.
Well, we'll have to have her on Bold Life. You'll have to meet her.
Awesome. She's awesome.
Awesome. Well, we are going to move into a heavier topic, but one that I'm very excited about. It's our Bookster segment. Bookster is a website for book lovers and much more. Joining us via Skype is Marvin Kalb. Marvin is an award-winning veteran journalist and author of Enemy of the People, Trump's War on the Press, The New McCarthyism, and the Threat to American Democracy. Welcome, Marvin.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So you're down in Washington with Brookings.
I'm at Brookings right now.
Okay, I'm a Harvard Kennedy School grad, so I'm very familiar with your work, and it's great to speak with you.
I am delighted that you are.
So, Marvin, I'm not a Harvard grad, unfortunately, but
She's the smartest one.
No, I'm interested to hear what motivated you to write this book. We're obviously in a very interesting climate in terms of media and journalism.
Well, actually, to be entirely truthful, I did not want to write this book. I am much happier as a journalist just telling a story to the public as best I can, as quickly as I can, as fairly as I can. But when the President of the United States began to use expressions like fake news, and most especially calling the American press the enemy of the people, I couldn't help myself. I wanted very much to answer the President and try to point out to him, as best I could, that the expression enemy of the people goes back to the 20th century. It was used by some of the worst people, by Hitler, by Stalin, by Mao Zedong. It was not an expression that was used by the president of a democratic country, and yet President Trump was doing just that. And I felt it was extremely necessary to point out to him that the press is not the enemy. The press is the very foundation of American democracy. If you undercut the press, you are undercutting our democracy.
Well, and we know the quote from Thomas Jefferson where he said if you had to choose between government and press, you have to have one or the other. He would take the press with no government. But I'm a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for him in 2016, but I do plan to vote for him in 2020. And what I've heard him say to differentiate and to actually echo what you're saying as far as the fake news issue, he says that fake news is an enemy of the people. It's when it is not being fair, and that a lot of conservatives from red state America aren't being fairly represented in the media, and that is a big problem.
I would like to answer that, and it's an excellent question, and it's a very important question, because the president has pointed out any number of times that the enemy of the people, in his mind, has to do only with fake news. But let us be clear about what the president means by fake news. He has said himself, Kellyanne Conway has said herself, that the fake news represents 91% of what it is that most people see and read and watch, listen to. 91% of the news they get is regarded as fake. So in other words, 91% is the enemy of the people, and 9% is not the enemy. Well, what is that 9%? The only answer that you get, that 9% is essentially Fox News. So all of the rest of the media is fake, and all of the rest of the media is the enemy of the people. So let's be serious. When you are calling 91% of the media the enemy of the people, that's effectively a damnation on all of the media. And that is wrong and historically wrong. It's philosophically inaccurate.
So, Mr. Kalb, in your book, you talk about the retreat, not just on the right, but also on the left, to the types of media that kind of agree with what people already think, the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses. How do we go back to having that objective voice? And can we do that in, the age of the internet?
That is a very central question in our society today. If the administration is arguing that 91% of what you see and read is fake, what they are saying in effect is that if that 91% criticizes something that the president has done or said, that it's fake, that you should pay no attention to it. What that means is two things. Number one, it demeans the press. It undermines the press. It puts impediments in the way of the average person finding out what is going on in the world. The second reason is the president has said himself that when he demeans the press, he does it for a specific political reason. And that is that, let's say he comes forth with a policy. The press, or many people in the press, criticize that. He can then say the American people will not believe anything that the press says. Therefore, the president gets off and is in the clear. And everything is blamed on the press.
So,
Let me just finish this point. There's something fundamentally wrong with that kind of reasoning. If you blame everything on the press, you are denying the American people the opportunity that was specifically written into the Constitution, that there is freedom of the press. The press is free to criticize people in power.
Sure.
That's the essence of it.
We're in shared agreement that that is the role of the press, that there is freedom of the press, that there should be no abridgment of the freedom of the press. We have that shared value. I would say, though, to respond to the 91% figure that you cited, that is from a study from the Harvard Kennedy School that showed that within the first 100 days of the Trump administration, that 91% of the quote-unquote mainstream media coverage of him was negative. And they said in the study, again, this is from Harvard Kennedy School, so it's not a right-wing think tank, said that that was unprecedented negativity. It was unprecedented. You didn't have any sort of level of negativity for any other president except for this one. So when you have a lot of people who voted for this president, 60 million people, and that's you know, yes, the popular vote was less than Hillary, but still it's roughly half the country of the voters who voted, and you have 91% negative. That's a big disconnect in terms of we the people.
I just want to jump in and just make it clear that negativity isn't necessarily fake, and that I think a lot of, as a journalist, I was, you know, also working under the Obama administration, and I certainly wrote my fair share of criticism there as well. So I don't think to say that there was no negative press of past presidents.
But proportionality is very skewed against Trump.
Well, yes.
Well, first of all, you're using a figure that I, forgive me, I question. I don't think that these Shorenstein Center...
Well, we can say the specifics. It was between 80 to 91%.
They never said that 91% of the press coverage was negative. That is simply not true. The 91% figure comes from the president. Can I answer your question?
Sure.
Okay. The 91% comes from the president and from Kellyanne Conway, one of his principal advisors. I did not make up that number. It comes from them. They are saying that 91% of coverage is fake. They didn't even use the word negative. You are using the word negative. What they are saying is that an awful lot of coverage is negative. That is correct. It is negative because a lot of the coverage is of issues about which the president is fundamentally wrong as a factual matter, not a matter of political principle, as a factual matter. Right now, there are fact checkers at the Times, at the Post, at CBS, NBC, a lot of the major news organizations saying that a great deal of what the president says is not true. For example, he wrote a recent op-ed piece in the USA Today newspaper. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody who read that piece said it is filled with inaccuracies.
Yes, and to just interrupt.
There's very little in it that is true.
Sorry to interrupt,
That is what is called negative, but it simply isn't true.
Nicole has a comment here, please, sir.
That's important.
I just want to say that, yes, and the USA Today actually did come out with a fact check, and there was a lot of inaccuracy in that. It wasn't an opinion piece, but still. I do want to move on because I've been in press conferences with President Trump, and it seems like he gets a lot of joy out of them. You know, as much as he hates the media, he also kind of needs the media, right? And he has fun during these press conferences. So how do you kind of put those two things together?
Well, I think that the president has always had a love-hate relationship with the press. When he was a very prominent real estate man in New York City, he would quite often be his own spokesman. He would make up a personality who spoke on behalf of the president, of the then real estate person, and he would, of course, say very positive things about himself. And when the New York Times ran stories about him that were critical, he then would attack the New York Times. That is essentially what has happened when he has moved from being a real estate person to the President of the United States. If a story is positive about him, and there have been many, then he likes it. Now look, let's be very clear about this. All presidents like to be praised. Everyone likes to be praised. But the President of the United States is a very special figure. It is fundamentally important in this society that there be somebody around who can say, Mr. President, just a second, you got that wrong, or that is fundamentally anti-democratic to the system.
And if I can, so I agree with you, we need fact-checking. I think that's an important role. But again, to add, sometimes you have to fact-check the fact-checkers. And I work with a nonprofit called Accuracy in Media. It's been around for 50 years. It's a conservative watchdog group that calls out bias, inaccuracies. I mean, you had the New York Times that refused to run that article that the New Yorker did run with the completely uncorroborated accusations against Judge Kavanaugh. That was a complete abandonment of journalistic principle. You had, and every day I write a blog post for them, you have an NBC reporter, pushing advocacy around Senate representation and saying we need to change the Senate so that a Republican can't get his judges through again. That's a reporter doing this. You had another NBC reporter who did a tweet saying that there were 0 senators, Republican side, who apologized to Christine Blasey Ford in the hearing, but Chuck Grassley did. And then also they ceded their time to a woman, so that's why none of them said anything. It wasn't like they were badgering her. So just over and over, you see the New York Times having to do corrections, retractions. You're seeing ABC News, Brian Ross, he was let go because of inaccuracies. So what about fact-checking the fact-checkers?
And this is on both sides, right? It's not just liberal media. It's
sure.
also conservative media.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
I didn't want to interfere with you. I was under the impression that this was an interview with you asking me questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I think you were just making a speech.
That's my question. What about fact-checking?
Will you acknowledge that?
What about
you were making a speech?
I was asking the question of what about fact-checking the fact-checkers?
You were not asking a question. You were making a speech that ended with a question, and I'd be happy to address that.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. You were asking whether a fact-checker needs a fact-checker. And my answer to that is, of course. The president needs a fact-checker. You need a fact-checker, too. And all I'm trying to say is that everybody should stick to the role that was assigned more or less to them. The press had a specific role to speak truth to power. It is to try to do the best that it can. No one is perfect. Reporters make mistakes. I've been a reporter now for more than 60 years. I have made many mistakes. Most of the time, I've got it right, and most of the time, most reporters get it right. To leap at a reporter for getting something wrong when most of the story is right is unfair. And I'm simply saying to you, since you asked the question, yes, there ought to be somebody who will check the checker, but there's no one more important than the President of the United States, and there's nobody around, except journalists who are there specifically to look at the president, what he has said, what he has done, and either say, yes, write the story, run with it, or, just a second, sir, that is not right. That's part of his job.
Sure. And so my question to you then is, the press is unelected, but the president is elected. So where's the responsibility of the press who is unelected? How can they be held accountable if there's no election for them? Whereas you could vote this president out if you don't like him.
What would you like to have? An election for you? You're now a reporter. You're functioning as a journalist. Should somebody be electing you?
Well, that's the question. How do we have accountability?
No, but I'm asking you the question. Would you like somebody to elect you? You have been selected by somebody who's paying you to ask these questions. And I think that's great. And I hope that you end up being the fairest, best reporter in America.
Well, actually,
I am simply saying, can I finish?
Sure. Well, I was just going to say I'm an entrepreneur, so I pay my own bills. So I'm the founder of Bold. So.
You were asking a question
Yes.
about who elects the press.
Yes.
The press is not there to be elected. The press is doing its job. The only people who are elected officials, led by the President of the United States. The President is elected by the people, and people select journalists just as they select dentists and they select somebody who cleans up the apartment, whatever. There are people who have jobs, and then there's the President. He is special.
Yeah, I think the role, or my favorite part about being a journalist, is getting to challenge people in power and ask the right questions. And I think we can all agree on that, at least.
Yes. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and I apologize if I came across as a lecture. I'm very passionate about this as well, and I want to get it right, and I know you do too. So thank you so much, Marvin Kalb.
And Mr. Kalb, I really enjoyed the book, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you all for joining us here today on Facebook and Periscope. What did you think about the show today? We had a viewer here that says, Cole Meechan says Nicole is cool.
Yeah.
She's
it's
very
a nice,
cool.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Cole.
Yeah.
So we think you're cool too. We think you all are cool too. What do you think about the show? If you liked it, if you disagreed,
if you thought it was
your
heated,
thoughts, everything, yeah. Share the show. Don't forget to like Bold TV on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter.
Oh, and don't
Instagram.
forget to register to vote.
Yes, make sure you
New York,
register.
Connecticut, Oklahoma, something like that. Look it up and register.
North Carolina too, I believe.
There you go.
Due today, so make sure to register to vote. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, vote.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure also to stay tuned for 12 p.m. Bold Business and Bold Life at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are peacing out. Thanks so much.
Bye. Have a great weekend, everyone.